This is our closing keynote. We have slightly run over time, as perhaps was always going to be the way. So as soon as this final keynote is finished, then we will be sharing all the fantastic sessions with you, which we've been publicising. And they will be up on our website, www.teamenglishNC.com. So Bennie, when you're ready.
I am ready. It is really lovely to have sat and listened to everybody's sessions so far today. And just to pull out some of the threads that have come through all of the sessions. So Sarah talking about an inclusive curriculum, the idea that through our subject knowledge and our disciplinary knowledge, we stitch students in. Mark and Matt really kind of shining a lens on how to examine text through different perspectives, and particularly talking about masculinity and toxic masculinity. Chris talking about audience identification, and Chloe showing, you know, that actually those texts that we use, like the Handmaid's Tale, aren't just maybe Key Stage 5 texts, that those ideas can be brought in to lower into the school. But I want to bring this back to a personal and political point, and I'm not going to sit here and bang any drums, but I do want to remind us of that child in the room, and through the lens of my own story. And there's no PowerPoint, it's just me, so I apologize if there aren't any flashy visuals, but I think I want to tell this story. So let me get started. So when I was a child, I read to escape into different worlds. I devoured them almost as a form of travel. And in this, I was the reader, the time traveler, the passenger, the silent witness to Heidi's adventures on the mountainside, to Anne's arrival at Green Gables, to Jo March's ascent into writerhood. But the joy I felt traveling with them, it wasn't enough to stop that tidal wave of realization and a real sense of sadness much later as I grew up. I stood squarely on the outside of the text. I was marginalia at best. And if by some impossible magic I could have transported myself into the text and lived in it, then I knew that Pemberley wouldn't have received me, that I would be an exotic rarity in Sherlock Holmes, associated with criminality, sensuality, and depravity. And in Jane Eyre, I'd be firmly locked in the attic, the madwoman searching for herself in the dark with a candle. And in poetry, perhaps erased from jeweled snapshots of moments in time. As a brown-skinned girl with a bad perm and some questionable clothing choices in the 90s, I longed to be the heroine in someone's story and to see myself, to identify, to feel included. I grew to understand that the books I read were of someone else's history. I didn't think to ask why. Most children take what's offered to them in a curriculum without question. And it's only as an adult that I have considered what I needed to know as a child to feel like I belonged somewhere. I needed to know that I was present in the world of the books I read. Where was my place? Did I exist? Who was writing books about me? Did I matter? Did my past, my history, my ancestry, my religion, my culture have any bearing or relevance to the world I lived in? Did my people write books? Were they important enough to be studied? Did my people have ideas? Well, what happened to those ideas? And as an adult, I've sifted through the sands of language and literature, trying to locate myself, trying to connect myself to this land I call home. And in the grains, I found words: brother, mother, tooth, king. And I took these words, spinning the dial to watch them fly back over seas and land masses to find their ancestors. And it was a nearly unbroken journey to my origins in India. And there I was, sitting in the English words I used every day. And it took me to do that as an adult. I leafed through the pages of gods and monsters, kings of men, faithful wives, errant children. Did they only live in this part of the world? Did the world of literature fall away over a cultural precipice somewhere after Greece? When my eyes were open to Gilgamesh and Rama, I didn't suddenly have less space in my brain to know Odysseus, Aeneas, and Beowulf. But I saw the epic hero in my history and felt a golden thread of connections spanning continents and cultures. And I was at least 18 before I read a whole novel written by a non-white author. I say at least because I'm not even sure it was in my first year at university, and I think it was perhaps The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. And it was the first time I'd seen the land of my ancestors in words. And then there was Rushdie, Vikram Seth, and then the writers of Africa, unraveling their identities, unspooling the tales told about them. And they were all there in a unit called post-colonial literature. I tell this to you now as guardians of the world of literature. I'm conscious that when you're never made absent, it's hard to understand the void. You may not have a precocious Asian girl in your classroom. You may think, I don't need to open those doors, for my children see themselves in poems and novels. They already belong. For those children, the power of an extraordinary English curriculum lies in its ability to demystify the other. The act of belonging is predicated partly on the idea of being welcome. It is one thing to know oneself and to feel belonging. It is another to welcome someone new into the fold and make them feel that they belong. If our students' understanding of the world through books is limited to the narratives of male, white Western Europe, lines are drawn both personally and politically. We have all seen the effect of othering in our society. We see it in socioeconomic conditions, in institutional prejudice, in the comments below the line of the national press, in the murder of George Floyd. So yes, Black Lives Matter, and now is the time to look at what we include in our teaching, but it mattered 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, before George Floyd, and I argue it would matter in the decades that follow. So I ask you, how do you make space at the table? How do you help a child feast on their life? And I use this phrase deliberately. I love the fact that Sarah asked us to pick out those poems that make the hairs on the back of our necks stand up. One of my favourite poems is Derek Walcott's Love After Love. Some of you may remember it from the old AQA Poetry from Different Cultures anthology. Let me remind you, he writes, "The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the letters, love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life." So how do we create an English curriculum that allows all children to be seen? I've been an English teacher long enough to know the practicalities of altering a curriculum. I know it takes time and effort, but if you have the time and the inclination, and I'm very much hoping that you do, let's consider these questions. Who is missing in your curriculum? Whose voices are lost? What is unacknowledged in your schemes of work or choice of text? Who is othered? How are you countering the narratives? How are you balancing positive representation against the inevitable narrow lens of established canonical texts? How are you fleshing out ideas and the ideologies? Where do your students hear the other story, the story of the othered? You take one thing from this. It's my request to take another look, go back and put on someone else's glasses, see your lessons, your schemes of work, your entire curriculum through the lens of gender representation, as Matt and Mark did, toxic masculinity, sexuality, race, and disability. You may not find ways of including everyone, but you might find ways of expanding the literary universe, paralleling stories, countering dominant narratives, and it's a start. And I say this with a caveat. It's not enough to place an out of context unit of work celebrating Black or Asian writers. One culturally diverse book is not enough. Sue Sanders, the founder of Schools Out, coined the term usualizing, and I've talked about this term a lot. It means to make usual the experiences and histories of traditionally marginalized peoples, to stitch them into the fabric of society, to make them part of the daily diet of all children from all backgrounds. Your curriculum then becomes an exercise in ways of seeing and being seen. It becomes a tapestry in which all of us exist. Macbeth is not just a meditation on power and ambition, it's a continuation of the universal narrative warning against defying a natural order and indeed God seen in cultures around the world. Blood Brothers is not just a reflection on class, but an extension of the global narrative on doppelgangers, twinning, brother against brother, seen in Yoruba culture in Nigeria, as well as in classical antiquity. So with that in mind, I finish here with the hope that you have seen me and with the hope that what you choose to do with your English teaching allows children to sit and to feast on their life. Thank you very much for listening.